just to give you all some things to look out for as we continue on this Diversity Now journey. We've already gone on over our building a pipeline for Black male teacher success and the schooling during a crisis steps for successful hybrid learning environments. Those were our first two in the series, and we have uploaded the YouTube videos of those. So if you are interested, you missed them, and you're interested in seeing what our first two installments of the series were about, please go to tu.edu/ or is it backward slash?
Forward, yes.
Now, and you can watch those installments. This week we're going over equity and equality, but just to give you an idea of what's coming up, on August 19th, we have our accessibility for all K-12 students in remote learning. August 26th, we're talking about scholar activism. And on September 2nd, we're talking about schooling during the crisis, pandemic pedagogy beyond triage. So we have three exciting installments coming up for you as it relates to our Diversity Now series. And as I finish giving that quick little update, I look and see my colleague, Belle Reyes, on the screen. So we're happy that she's back. So I will, Louise, I'll let you kind of give your intro before we jump into things.
All right, thank you. So I am just, as the director of the Graduate School of Education, super proud and excited that we have Dr. Ijeoma Onanuju here as our series host for this webinar that Dr. Michael Barber and I spent a lot of time over the last few months trying to incubate and bring something to fruition. And then Ijeoma stepped forward, and it was all came together in just a beautiful way. So thank you very much, Ijeoma, for taking the lift from here on out and facilitating this fantastic series. So I'm excited to have all of you with us. And as Ijeoma said, look at the previous recordings. I think you'll be really engaged, and I'm super excited about today's. And of course, having to just to be able to see Ernani again, who's also an alumni from our leadership program, is just super exciting. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Ijeoma.
No problem. And I'll get right into introducing our panelists. I'll start with Ernani Santos, who is the principal of Elite Public Schools. He is really the reason why the Diversity Now series is happening. I was in his office when Dr. Santiago came in, and we were able to connect. And if it wasn't for that fateful meeting in his office, I don't know if we'd be here right now. So we have him with us. We have Britt Irby, who is the Associate Director of Innovation Bridge. Innovation Bridge is a all-around consulting company in Sacramento that does everything community-based and education-based, very powerful. And then we have the director of Innovation Bridge, Belle Reyes, with us today. So these three individuals are family to me, but first and foremost, they're colleagues and soldiers in this work that we're doing. And so we just wanted to be able to bring them as part of this conversation as we talk about equity and equality. So with that being said, you all ready to go?
Hey, they say if you stay ready, you ain't got to
get ready. That's right.
Hey, that's really the model we live by. Stay ready so we ain't got to get ready. I swear Belle and Britt say that to me every time we meet.
Yes. To our young people alike, right?
Right.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. So the three of you are all doing work in and around education in different capacities, but the work often overlaps. And so one of the questions that I wanted to just start us off with is there's often the words equity and equality in education often get confused for each other. And I was hoping you all could help us out by just letting us know, what is the difference for you in your work between equity and equality?
Everybody's like,
Anyone.
this is like double, hey, this is like double dutch. No, this is like double dutch. Everyone's like,
yeah, like jump in. Well, we can offer, at least, we do work in education, but we like to say we work at the intersect, right, between communities and schools. So we exist kind of in both lanes of the work. And when we talk about both equality and equity, we couldn't agree more. I think too often folks see them as synonymous with each other and, interchangeably, right, or using the terms. But we think that when it comes to our work, both in education and community work, it's important and critical to distinguish both, right? But they're both necessary. And for us, when we think of equality, it's equal to all. When we think of education, there's a more obligation into ensuring the needs of our young people are met and those of our family and our staff. But we also recognize when we think of equity, that some of our young people and our families, we like to say, need that much more love, right? And so how we operationalize that, we think, kind of exists more in that, equity lane.
I think for me, especially just kind of considering where we're at with the pandemic and this whole distance learning, here is a live in your face example of equity. We give all kids a device, and expect for them to just be blossoming and flourishing, but it's not equitable because, a lot of our young people haven't had the training, in order to flourish. Whereas there's a population of students who are very, very familiar with many different platforms. So they can jump on and not miss a beat and do all the work from home. Whereas some of the students that we're servicing are having some challenges. I mean, we're going to get through it, but, they all are equal in having the device, but it's not equitable because some students will need a little bit more. And I'm just trying to give a more current example of what that would look like. But yeah, there's definitely a gap or a divide in terms of, students being successful.
Yeah, I think my, co-panelists spoke to the definitions, and really it's pretty intuitive when we think about the classroom space. We recognize already that each student is not coming in the same place. Each student won't have access to the same resources, as Mr. Santos was just saying. So why then would our approach be exactly the same, right? And so we look and lean toward equity to think about meeting the needs as presented and how we're able to be more responsive to those needs.
Thank you. So, Ernani, you've already brought up, the 10,000-pound gorilla in the room, and let's get into that a little bit more. Right now our kids are experiencing a lot. The field of education right now is going through a transition, a transformation, some would even say. One of the reasons why we called this series Diversity Now is because now is the moment, right, for us to begin to do some of these things. And so I'm wondering if you all could speak to, like, what does equity now mean? What is equity for this moment? Like, what's the value of that for our children right now in this moment?
We can, in regards to what's going on now, we can just start simply at access to Wi-Fi. Like we have this whole, oh yeah, we'll just do distance learning, but there are many of our families who do not have Wi-Fi, and sometimes it can be spoken about like you don't have, it's like it's supposed to be automatic. But I was just telling a few of my colleagues, if I had been a youngster during this time, this would have been a struggle for me. Because my family definitely wouldn't have had Wi-Fi. I remember growing up, years, we didn't even have a telephone in the house. So, you're talking about equity. you know, that's going to be a huge divide. You know, we're expecting for students to not miss a beat, get on your Google Classroom, get on your Zoom meetings, but we haven't even addressed, like, you know, the basic need of the access to even have the internet. You know, and I know there are companies out there, and, you know, schools are doing what they can. Like, we're getting ready to begin distribution of you know, Wi-Fi devices, you know, routers to give to the families. But, you know, that's going to be, we're already 1 week in. This is our first week, so, you know, some families may have missed 2 weeks before they get access. You know, like I said, in some communities, they're not missing a beat. You know, there's Wi-Fi readily available. There's multiple devices. You know, you have a family with, you know, 4 young people in the house, but there's only one device. You know, they all are being expected to be on Zoom. So, you know, there are so many issues with that gorilla in the room.
Yeah, and I think, Mr. Santos, you hit on a couple of other important points, kind of I think the basic needs. And when we think about equity now, it's what about those other fundamental basic needs that our young people need that aren't new in context, right? They're just more intensified given the current circumstances with COVID. And I think also the conversation, I think, has taken an additional layer and focus, because then too, the teachers and the staffs, part of those educational environments are also impacted. So there's kind of this dual lane of conversations. But I think, you know, Dr. Ananuju, when you ask the question, what does that mean when we talk about equity now, it's that we still have to address those basic needs. And even more so because as educators, we have a lens into, you know, the household, right? Those lived environments of our young people. So it's even more so critical now that we're addressing those basic needs beyond just what, you know, the technical aspects are to be able to engage in a distance learning.
Would for Dell or Britt, because, you know, I feel like with our MBK fellow program, we did a lot of equity work in the moment, right? Like we didn't wait to get permission. We like figured out what the need was and started working. Could one of you speak, maybe Britt, could you speak to like some of the things, some of the equity pieces that we implemented in response to the moment?
Sure. So we have a wonderful opportunity to partner with Dr. Ananuju and others in the implementation of the My Brother's Keeper Sacramento Youth Fellowship Program. So what that typically looks like is engaging young men of color here in Sacramento in a 9-month fellowship program focused around policy advocacy, right, and having them help inform those improvements for young men of color in our region. This year, of course, just as they got started into their research, we all COVID happened and everyone went inside. And so we really did need to be responsive and pivot our focus. It's always frustrating, and I know it's the same thing in the classroom. You have a lesson plan, you're ready to go, something shifts, something else happens, and you have to kind of restart almost, and that's what we did. But some of the things I think helped was that we were informed by the fellows themselves and also by fellow alumnus who helped to support the program as well. So they were able to tap into what those needs were. In some cases, they were different than we thought. One of the first steps was just to increase our engagement, because we recognized, you know, twice a month wasn't going to be enough, especially when we don't have the eyes on in the same way. We also didn't want to overwhelm the fellows who were trying to learn distance learning and dealing with whatever their family was dealing with at the same time. So we really did hear from them and focus on the immediate needs, addressing the feeling of isolation that the young men had expressed. And we did a quick survey, like first meeting, hey, tell us what you need right now. We delivered food just for the immediate need. And then even in those engagements of the drop-offs, we're able to assess where there was some additional need family by family and try to meet that as well. And I think it was about more about just engaging and sort of turning what it looks like to advocate for policy into sort of a space that made sense during a pandemic, which was the virtual world, right? And as we all know, if you give young people a little bit of space, they'll go. So I think within a couple weeks, they were like, let's do a social media campaign and we're going to help one another to feel connected. And so really that was just kind of creating the space for them to keep doing what they do in a way that was safe for them.
Man, that's such a phenomenal answer, because you bring out a few qualities of equity that I don't think we think about often, right? The first one, I think the loudest point you made was just student voice or youth voice, right? Like, it's extremely important when you talk about equity and you are trying to implement equitable measures in whatever school or program that you're working in, that you first got to go to the customer, right? You first got to go to the youth and their families and ask them what it is that they need and how do they need it. The other piece that I picked up was just the importance of connection and being able to make authentic connections with our young people, not based on the program's needs, but based on their own needs, right? That relationship. Ernani, as the principal of Elite, where you have, kindergarten through middle school, how do you make sure that you stay engaged with student voice so that all students of all grades are heard as you all try to implement equity in your school?
So obviously with school just beginning and still navigating those waters of what distance learning looks like in the contact, we've done a variety of things. Like we had our own series as a school where we brought parents on, but students were able to get on and speak as well. But we're getting ready to push out, some surveys just in regards to obtain some feedback to dial in exactly what it is that the students need. Because, this first 3 days, there's been a variety of, not issues, but challenges. And unless we're in tune with the young people, we don't know exactly what it is that they need. And I think that point is key. Like, in order for things to be equitable, we need to have that information. We have to have that data, because once again, it'd be simply us pushing out devices and saying, okay, it's equitable. No, everyone has the same device, and and that part is equal, but it's not equitable because we haven't begun to intimately get involved to see what they need. So we're getting ready to push out a number of surveys, and we're going to try to do this weekly, so we can just be in tune with what the need is. So if it's me needing to create, like a video to push out on our school YouTube, in regards to just even getting logged on. Because one issue that we're seeing is that students aren't logging on with their school G Suite. They're trying to do everything from their personal Gmail, and it's not connecting. Right. So that's just like one small example, but it's huge because it's a gatekeeper keeping them out from getting into their Google Classroom. So, that's the other thing. As we're getting this feedback, we're going to start to create videos so students can always reference it. Families can always reference it because they just don't have the experience, to be able to navigate that. So yeah, we're going to be soliciting feedback weekly. And then just also being flexible and being open. Like, we've had parents come in and we've taken them to meet with them as they come in, so we can try to get it early versus like, okay, no, you have to, wait. We're in the first week. No, okay, let's hear you. Let's see if we can meet your needs now. And so yeah, you just got to keep the line of communication open. But yeah, the biggest piece is just going to be the constant the surveys every week, because it's tough with when the kids are here. You can hear everything they need, but when they're not here and they're at home and they're on just on a Zoom, like, we don't really know, unless the parents are going to step up and say, okay, my kids, which we've had a few, need that. But we're like everyone else. We're trying to problem solve as we go, right? Because this is all uncharted territory, never been done before on a large scale, anyways.
Jessica Reed put in the chat that equity now means meeting students right where they are at this present time. COVID-19 has changed family life as we know it. Therefore, we can't do what we've always done and expect student achievement. We need to respond to the real needs of students in order for all to access their education. Equality does not mean equity now or then. I think Jessica brings up a very good point, which is, we should not just be responding to COVID-19 and implementing equity now, right? But we should be creating processes and systems of equity that extends beyond the pandemic and really kind of creates a new future for our children. That it reminds me of what Jeff Duncan Andrade wrote about when he talked about hope, right? He talked about deferred hope, hokey hope, and mythical hope, right? And I think in very similar senses, we can have the same when it comes to equity, right? We can have equity that is for aesthetic purposes only. So like you were talking about, Hernani, I'm gonna give all my kids laptops and put a big sign on it that says equity, but I'm really not doing anything beyond that, right? I'm not really diving in deeper. Or, I can look at the one kid in the one situation and say, like, look at that kid. That kid is an example of equity. Or at the worst, right? Which I know some schools are doing this. Some schools are saying, well, it's COVID-19. So we can't implement equity policies right now, right? We gotta wait till we get through this moment before we start doing that. And so just thinking about now, but also thinking about tomorrow and as we emerge out of COVID-19, what do you think schools, families, community organizations, what do you think we could be doing to ensure that this is not just a flash in the pan equity now, but that it becomes equity tomorrow and equity beyond?
I think one of the things is that we have to take a real critical, conscious lens, because I think when we talk about inequity or we talk about equity in education systems, now, of course, as a result of current circumstances, we have to take more bold steps. But what it's also revealing to us, I think, are those inequitable practices within our educational systems. And I think it's in intensifying kind of those space and place and procedures and practices that not just are failing our young people and not meeting the needs of our young people because of current circumstances we're in, but that have failed and not met the needs of our young people, I think, historically, right? So again, I think when we have conversations as an education system, it's about what do we not have? What was our system failures pre-COVID, that now put us in a position where we're being, in some ways, reactive, right? And we're working with our education systems. And I think it's critical to work with community partners to kind of stand in that gap around addressing those basic resource needs that we've been talking about. Absolutely the technology piece, but we're also talking about ensuring young people have and families have, opportunities to get their bills paid, opportunities to have food on the table, right? We're talking about there's still a need for school resources in addition to the Wi-Fi and the laptop. We still need resources in terms of, pens and papers and those additional things that don't necessarily go away because we're operating in a distance virtual learning space. So I think the question more becomes about, again, that critical lens around where has our system failed us, right? I think that if we had better placed systems, we might have better placed practices to be more responsive, I think, given the current circumstances. And I think now we're all kind of trying to be reactive and as responsive as possible and trying to stand in those multiple gaps that are surfacing as a result of not only COVID, right, but what we know to be the social and civic unrest that our nation's experiencing as well.
Well, I'm hoping that you know, this whole scenario is like shining this, you know, glaring spotlight. You know, it's like many other things that happen in this country. Like some people will have the perspective of that's not real, right? Like that's not happening, you know. But you know, inequity in education is very real. You know, so I hopefully this is shining this big spotlight on it. You know, I would say even just no matter where you're at, like even teachers in particular areas, you know, the whole like, okay, it's equal, sink or swim. Oh, they just didn't want it. You know, they're not working hard enough. Um, and I'm just, you know, I'm always like optimistic, right? So I'm always looking for the silver lining in, you know, whatever the situation is, no matter how bad it is. And so hopefully people are really opening their eyes to what the issues are, that our students are coming and they need more. You know, equal is not enough. You know, you have to meet the kids where they're at. So, and I just think that more conversations like this, utilizing platforms like you're doing, Doc, and really getting that out there to make sure that, you know, because like you said, you don't want this to be a flash in the pan, but if we stop talking about it and spreading it, you know, spreading it out there, then, you know, oftentimes people, once we're through the pandemic, you know, I could see people just going back to exactly what they've always done, um, and going back to being comfortable when we should be really, really uncomfortable, because there are a lot of young people whose needs are not being met. But that's just that whole mentality of, everyone's going at the same school. Some people will be successful, and the ones who aren't, they just didn't want it. They're not disciplined, you know. They're out there doing foolishness when really, now we need to give them more tools, you know. Even with the program that Britt was just speaking of that you guys are involved in, you know, that mentorship piece is huge. Young people need that because they don't always know or have been exposed to different things. So we just, you know, we just got to keep the foot on the gas, so to speak. And you know, once we get through this, if we return back to school, like it can't be business as usual. And hopefully for some, because you know, I know a lot of teachers are very caring, like they have a heart for kids, but yeah, sometimes we need to shed the light on it. And this is like a glaring example. Like you can't get past this. Like what's going to happen? I know a lot of schools are starting next week. They're going to have probably half the kids. A teacher might have half the kids in the class that didn't even log on to Zoom, and that's going to be very, very telling, because I know we're experiencing that now. Like, you know, we'll have 10, 15 kids who are still trying to get the necessary things just to do what we're doing right now. So, you know, I know you know, a lot of educators have hearts out there, but sometimes you need to see it. It is real, you know, just because you're not experiencing doesn't mean it's not happening. So, you know, I just think, you know, I applaud, you know, what you're doing, and we just got to keep the foot on the gas.
Britt, did you want to add anything to that?
Sure. I think it's just in addition to what Armani and Belle shared, follow what's happening with the families, right? Think about, because we do make assumptions, especially if that community is different from the place where we live. Sometimes we may assume, you know, oh, families or, you know, folks have lost their jobs, and so there's a different level of need that's happening. When in fact, many of our families in our communities are considered to be essential workers. They are in places and jobs that never quarantined, that kept, you know, staying open, and their doors stayed open, and in fact maybe have additional hours. So that child and their siblings may in fact be home all day alone. And the oldest sibling then we see taking on the responsibility of making sure all of their siblings are understanding what's happening with distance learning, as Armani said, possibly on one device. So, find out and follow what's happening with the families, and that will be different within communities and certainly school by school. But what's happening with the families is the context for what's happening with the student too. So the better we understand that and hear that firsthand and not make assumptions about that, the more informed our decisions will be.
And I think that was just profound, like assumptions. I seen something flash in the chat earlier about, some students will not even have a quiet place to focus. Well, the assumption is that when we do distance learning, the student is going to have a quiet place to learn. But, if you're a family like mine growing up, you were in like a three bedroom place, 2-bedroom place, and there's 6, 7, people in the house. Well, where's the quiet place? Right. So that's a huge assumption. So, Britt bringing that, people making assumptions, that's a huge point. And it's something that the average person is just not going to think about.
I was just having that conversation the other day where someone was telling me that in their child's classroom, the kids get in trouble for not having their video screen on. And on one hand, I really understand why it's important to have the video on when you're in school and doing those things. But I also was thinking, like, what about the kid who got a million different things happening in his house right now? And the only quiet place might be in the bathroom or in the closet, right. But they got, mom or dad or, just other family members that are moving and constantly, and we don't know how they feel about that. They might be like, hey, I'm embarrassed about what's happening in my background, right? And so I think that just that idea of every kid's study environment, particularly now in this moment, right? Those are things that we take for granted, but knowing that they're definitely not equal. I'm looking through the chat, and Ryan Bonet posts that while considering the needs of general education students, think and plan for the various needs and often greater need for our special education students. This population is often quiet, and their voice often comes from trusted staff speaking up for them. I want to talk about our special education students. I also want to talk about, our students with language differences, right? Mm-hmm. Like, how do we make sure that we are taking those students into consideration when we're thinking about equity?
I just think that that was a profound statement. Historically, our students who need the services through special ed are they don't always have the resources. Even when I think back to all my years prior to coming to Elite, like, just to have supplemental materials, everyone being on the same page in terms of differentiating and scaffolding and doing things differently, because those students need a whole different type of support, right? And I know it's tough. I taught for 12 years before going into administration. Trying to meet those needs when you have a whole class of 35 or so kids, but once again, it's not equitable. You're pushing out the same information, the same lesson plan. That part is equal across the board, but it's not equitable because this person needs more supports. They are not getting that. So that is a big a big deal, big issue for our students in that population. That then sometimes when we're looking at IEPs, like are those accommodations always being met? which because they're there for a reason, so they need to be met. And if they're not, students are not being served. So there's a huge equity gap when you're talking about, general ed versus our students with IEPs. So, and I think, I think once again, silver lining, I think that once we get the handle on the use of the technology at our hands, being able to video, being able to, post whatever, say you have a student who needs the IEP and they need extra, you can record yourself doing some tutoring. You can, and not specific for that kid, but just in general, and you can post it to YouTube, and they could always reference back to that. So when they need a reminder, when they need to hear it again, because sometimes it's just like sports, right? You need reps. You don't learn how to shoot a jump shot in the first time the coach tells you you're hit. Well, maybe you did, Ijoma. I heard you had a pretty good jump shot, but most people have to shoot 10,000 jump shots, and so hopefully people are kind of looking at, well, yeah, this is a bad scenario, but there's some good that can come from it. Even from a Google Classroom standpoint, you can start giving support specifically to that student who needs it. That's totally different from what the class is doing. And guess what? No one will ever know. You might be giving student work according to their level, but no one knows what you're pushing out to them, because you could push it out individually. So, hopefully everyone is taking in these lessons and using, seeing what the positive in these platforms are. Yeah, because you can be, reaching students and no one else would ever know. If I did a video for Ijoma because he needed more help in common denominators, I could push something out totally to him on Google Classroom with a video that I did personally, and Britt and Belle would never know, right? So there are really more ways to make our practices equitable, but we have to be willing to put in the work too.
I definitely want to hear from Britt and Belle, and I like that idea of using technology to really help us implement equity. But I just wanted to say, man, your setup is looking kind of nice, man. Like we all over here with regular setups. You over there looking like you Rush Limbaugh.
About to drop an album.
Mic check. Testing 1 2.
He looking official over there, got the hat on and everything. Like, how I get your setup, man?
The game orchestrator.
Britt or Belle, either one, both of you. What do you think about in terms of equity for our special education and our language students?
Yeah, I would agree with Mr. Santos that, we still have to be mindful of what that support looks like. And in fact, I would echo some of the examples that you shared, Mr. Santos, and one of your colleagues, Dr. Elena Shackelford over at Elite Public Schools, uplifted the fact that you probably have more accessibility in terms of that individualized needs with young people because of the virtual platforms, and because of the distance learning schedules, so that there's more opportunities to schedule an individualized session with a young person that might need more of that individualized support, whether it's in academics or it's social emotional, or otherwise. I think it's whether virtually or in person, we have to be responsive to the indigenous native languages of our families and our young people. So I don't necessarily think that should shift, that we still should be ensuring that continues to exist, again, in the virtual space for our young people and for our families, and the ways that we're communicating. If we're sharing surveys, ensuring that they're in their home language, that they're accessible. And I think when we talk about abilities, it's also mindful of the ADA space when we're in this virtual platform, ensuring that there's text, that we're kind of reinforcing and restating what we're verbally sharing in text, and also, again, in communicating in language that aligns with the language from the home environment.
Hey, that's a term that I'm taking with me today. Indigenous home language. I love that. And to me, that is even more important right now because our students are learning in home, right? Like this is like the first time that we're bringing the classroom into the home in such a way that those two are clashing into each other, right? Where you can have literally in the background those indigenous home languages going while in front of you on the screen, right? A totally different style of communicating. And it's different, right? Because sometimes we think that parents understand and they may not even be able to make those connections. So that's pretty phenomenal. Britt, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm grateful to Ryan for bringing up the issue around our students with special needs, especially in a conversation about equity. We should also then speak to the fact that we see disproportionately, particularly when we think about like an ED diagnosis or those who have been labeled, emotionally disturbed. You do a classroom visit and you walk through, we see Black and Brown students in those classrooms, right? And we know that sort of capacity caseload challenges oftentimes prevent those IEPs from being followed the way that they should. Parent engagement, all the student teacher engagement, those things that are supposed to happen for IEPs sometimes don't. And so, perhaps I like the shift that we're having now and talking about the opportunities that distance learning provides, because I think accountability is one of those opportunities, right? How are we able to engage and understand what's happening better, and maybe particularly for the students who need additional support and services, and how are we able to use this opportunity where we can have greater access to make sure that we're meeting those needs.
I want to we're almost out of time here, but I want to ask you all a question, a little bit of a curveball. We often think of equity in this conversation as it relates to our students and families. I was wondering if you all had any thoughts about equity, but as it relates to the providers. I think providers are often left out of that conversation of equity. But what does equity now mean for the providers, for the teachers, for the administrators, for the community-based workers, for the campus? Like, what does equity mean for them?
All right, I'll jump on in. It's a direct parallel, just in terms of learning, even for the students, right? So the students need different supports to learn, and for staff members who maybe not so technologically savvy will need some extra support as well. I'm in the process, as we're doing, because we're doing a staff survey as well, checking in with them, seeing what the needs are. I just feel like we all should be modeling. So, if we're not okay with teachers just saying, okay, this is what it is, now go do it. We got to be like that with the staff as well. And so once we receive the feedback from the surveys, in my head, I already know that there's several videos that I need to create. So if staff members forget certain things on how to operate in Google Classroom, they can simply just go to the link that that we as a school will be providing for that extra support. So, no, staff members need just as much support as the students, because this is all brand new. If you've never had to, and I, personally, Dr. Newell always uses, I'm geeking out, so I geek out, this type of stuff is fun for me. You see the microphone, so that part is, but everyone's not like that. Some people really can be scared of technology, don't want to touch it, and because it takes time, but for certain people like Dr. Newell and myself, like we would just go play around with it all day, just because it's of interest. So yeah, we want to, as a school, Elite Public Schools, we want to provide those same type of supports for the staff, just like with the kids. Like, I just feel like we just need to model it all the way around, so if we're expecting for our teachers to do that with the kids, we need to do it, as far as administrators to the staff. And we're growing together, and we're, so just constantly being in tune with them, conversations, obtaining feedback, and we just go from there. Like, we had this huge, so right now, here's the issue. We just had this meeting. Parents are like, oh, it's just too many links. Like, I got my Zoom link, and so it's I have my Google Classroom link, and we're using Benchmark Universe, and then we have to go here. And so the teachers are starting to feel that too, because they're having to answer a million different questions trying to support the parents. So what I did, I said, okay, let's try it out. And I did a sample one. It seemed like it'd be all right, but we're going to use the free Google Sites, right? Where you just create a free one. And we're going to, for every teacher, we want them to put all those links on that page, right? So now the parents doesn't have to worry about remembering every platform. They're going to simply go to the teacher's Google site, their own personal website, and then all the links will be there. So if I want to go to Zoom, I'm just going to click on Zoom. But supporting the staff means that I'm going to have to go in and train them up on how to do it, right? So it's still providing that same support. So it's no different.
Britt and Bill, you all are coming from the community side of things. How do we provide equity for our community folks that's just as dedicated to helping our babies thrive?
I think that, you talked about the providers is recognizing that they are in fact that, a provider, right? And since March, there hasn't necessarily been a rest. We haven't rested, and we're also not immune to the challenges that we're experiencing in the community and in our own homes. And even as providers, many of us are operating, serving as providers and also serving as educators in our own home, to our own children, to our own families, and kind of wearing and operating in dual capacities and dual roles. And so I think one of the things we say is that we also had to be mindful of just the healing and the social emotional support of our providers. Because again, I think as Britt kind of uplifted earlier, many of them, they are essential workers. So again, they haven't necessarily rested, and in many ways may have been critically impacted in different ways than those in which we serve. So I think it's important to recognize and acknowledge that, and that it really will take a collective effort, and to also just ask in terms of what needs are and how are you doing, and ensure that we're doing check-ins and that the basic needs of our providers are also being met, because we're having to find ways to be more very resourceful and creative without competing for resources, which are very far few and in between, so that we're better able to work in close collaborative partnerships with our educators and our school systems. They're operating in that distance learning, and we're kind of standing in that gap to provide those additional support resources that are needed so that they're able to do so.
Yeah, and I think because our partners are used to working in that kind of responsive and resourceful space, right? Community partners come to a campus and maybe they get a portable, maybe they don't, maybe they can access the cafeteria to feed, kids after 3, maybe not. I think many are used to being able to think on the fly, be innovative, be creative, and make it happen with whatever resources are available. And we've been able to see some really exemplary dynamic practices, even just in summer engagement virtually with some of our community-based partners, to the extent that, Bella and I had a chance to do a virtual site visit and really had to kind of check to make sure we were actually online. Like there was a system. It felt very much like we went through an office almost, and someone checked us in, and we got to see what was happening in the classrooms, and we got to see those strategies that were impactful to keep the kids engaged, to keep them learning, and to make sure that they were okay and felt supported. So I think there's opportunity for our non-traditional educators to shine here. Many have already been, as Belle mentioned, on the boots on the ground doing this work this whole time, and are not just picking this up in the fall. So let's look to them for their levels of expertise in terms of how to engage, because I think that that's often sometimes lost in the traditional K-12 and post-secondary systems. And hopefully those dynamic providers that offer so much, that are important to our kids and our families, don't get on that list of things that aren't prioritized during distance learning and COVID, right? We got to make sure that that they remain at the forefront of our practice and our approach to supporting our families and our kids.
Yeah, I appreciate all three of your responses. For me, one of the things that I really was hoping that one of you would say, and Bill, I think you said it, was just healing is a part of equity. And I don't know if we always understand that, right? That to me is one of the things that distinguishes equity from equality. Equality doesn't focus on the healing part, right? Where equity really is about restoring you. It's about taking that piece of you that is missing and trying to do whatever's possible to make you whole again. And I think a lot of our educators, a lot of our providers and educators of color right now have been really, really, really pouring a lot of themselves into their students in this moment, just because of what's been happening, right? We understood what the equity gap was before, and we understood what it is now. And so a lot of folks have really been like going above and beyond, but after a while, they need a little bit of equity too. They need a little bit of restoration and healing as well. And so I was hoping that point would come up, and it did. We have 5 minutes left, so I'm gonna ask you all probably the most important question of the day, but do you have any final thoughts as it relates to equity and equality?
Well, I would just piggyback. I thought that you did a good job of expressing that, but it kind of made me reflect upon the TED Talk video we were privy to, and I just think that just being conscious as educators in our practice, right? Because and having a different lens or frame of reference is critical, because some of the practice that we as educators have used, all these years are causing harm, right? So the example that was given was it was a STEM lesson, the balloon with the, magnetic, with the hair, and having a class in it, probably a lesson that was done, but there will be particular hair types that's not going to work. So that person is singled out in that activity and cannot do the activity, and that particular lesson has caused harm. And I just think that we as an educational system, as educators need to really take a close look at our practice, even when we think, because we don't have ill intentions, but I think that we don't always consider everybody involved and how one thing like that is causing harm. So I just really thought that was profound. Just do some self-reflection. What type of practices are we using that are alienating kids, that are not equitable? Because that definitely was not equitable. That particular young lady couldn't even do the assignment, right, because of her hair type, which is beautiful, but just will not work with what the teacher was asking, right? So I think the speaker said that, daughter came home crying, or, it's not right. So that healing, so there's some healing that needed to take place in that moment. So I think that's huge, because sometimes if we're, that's that bias, right? That unconscious bias that we don't even know that we have, and we need to just have, and we all need to just have open and honest conversations with ourselves. And I think that goes back to the earlier question, Doc, where in order to keep this thing pushing, we also need to take a good hard look in the mirror and be honest, right? And so that way we can adjust and adapt our own practices so we can stop doing that, you know, and begin some of that healing. So I thought that was deep.
Dr. Ananuju, we just want to uplift your leadership. I think, and it's important to create space and place for these conversations to happen, for this learning, I think, to happen. And mentioned this earlier, I just think, you know, we have to move forward boldly, courageously in how we embody and operationalize equitable practices, and also not to be afraid of when we're unconsciously contributing towards inequities, right? And then, as you would always say, you know, grow in grace, right? So I think that that's going to be critical moving forward.
No, I think the same. I'm excited. I'm trying to lean into the excitement of the opportunities, and speaking as not only a person who's working with and has worked for educational systems, but as a mom who's really intimidated by the idea of distance learning for a whole semester or more, leaning into the opportunities and what this could look like anew, and how some of the barriers that have existed for a really long time can be easily sort of adapted and adjusted and dismantled now in this opportunity when everything is new, so that we don't go back to the same thing, as was mentioned earlier, but we create new normals that will better serve the kids who need us most.
And I'll just say, I'm going to take a page out of LeBron James' book when he said, Black Lives Matter is not a movement, it's a lifestyle. And I would say similarly, equity is not a policy, it's a lifestyle. It's the way you approach not just your job today, but every day. And I think that once you adopt that particular ethic, then it becomes natural, right? Because everything you do, you think about those that don't. You know, the idea of student voice, family voice, that's not a policy. That's a practice. That's something that is embedded in you. And so I really appreciate the three of you hopping on with me today and having this conversation. I thought it was a great conversation. Just looking through the chat and seeing what some of the folks were saying, right? I think everyone got something out of today. And we're continuing on with our diversity series. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we completely sign off. Again, on August 19th, we have the accessibility for all K through 12 students in remote learning. On August 26th, we have our scholar activism webinar. And then on September 2nd, we're talking about schooling during a crisis, pandemic pedagogy beyond triage. In addition to that, I have the awesome responsibility of coordinating the equity, diversity, inclusion education program here at Touro University. And we still have a few slots available for somebody that wants to sign up and get their master's in equity, diversity, inclusion, and education. So if that is you or you know someone, we're going to be doing a lot of fun things in that program. But most of all, this conversation is just going to continue and become a year-long process where we begin to embed the values of equity, diversity, and inclusion into who we are as practitioners and not just as policymakers. So just want to throw that out there. Michael, is there anything that I'm missing before we sign off?
No, I believe that is everything.
All right. Well, thank you all again. Ernani, Britt, Bell, appreciate you all for hopping on with us tonight. And to all of our attendees, thank you. Hopefully we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.